Are we headed for a mass CISO exodus? Organizations may have budget for cybersecurity, but without a commitment to process, will it leave CISOs in the lurch?
You're listening to Defense in Depth.
Welcome to Defense in Depth. My name is David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO series, and my guest co-host, one of our favorites. In fact, this whole episode is filled with favorites. You'll meet the other one in a second. But it's Lee Parrish, the CISO over at Newell Brands. Lee, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here again, David.
Our sponsor for today's episode is Palo Alto Networks. They have a brand new solution. You're going to want to hear about it. It is the Cortex Cloud, defining the code to cloud to SOC future through real-time security. It's pretty darn cool. More about that a little bit later in the show. All right, Lee, how can organizations better support CISOs beyond just budget? And this was a question that Dan Maslin, CISO of Monash University, laid out some steps that boards can actually take to do this. And this includes everything from understanding the threats an organization actually faces to working with the CISO to engage external auditors. These steps that Dan put out, are they enough to keep a CISO doing their job? Because we hear it again and again that CISOs struggle to get sort of the recognition, respect, and attention from the executive suite. What think you?
Yeah, I think what Dan outlined in his article, I agree with everything. Clear communications, understanding the threats, plans for addressing them. If the board or the executive leadership is looking to learn more about these things, that in and of itself shows good support. They're curious about the topic. They want to know more. They want to make sure that we're providing due care. So yeah, I think that's really good support. And I think Dan's points were really good.
And audience, I just want to point out that Lee is perfect for this discussion because he is the author of a brand new book called The Shortest Hour, The Applied Approach to Boardroom Governance Cybersecurity. And the reason it's called The Shortest Hour is because that's the time CISOs have in front of the board. Explain, Lee.
It's an average. I know that some CISOs have more time, some have less, some have no time. But I took an average of about 15 minutes a quarter to present to the audit committee or the technology committee or to the board. And there's 4 quarters in a year, so that's an hour. And I believe that an hour is not enough time to talk about something as critical as cybersecurity.
Very, very good point. Well, more on Lee's book will be linked from the blog post from this episode, but the person to help us with this very discussion is another good friend of the CISO series. We love having him on board, and the fact that we have the two of you, this is going to be fantastic. It is the VP of Information Security and CISO over at Wynn Resorts, none other than David Tyberski. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Glad to be here.
Who's losing out there?
Derek A. said, quote, average CISO tenure is right around 2 years. Average CFO tenure is around 5 years. And average CIO tenure is right around 3 years. So the last 3 years have been massive year-over-year increases in cyber budgets without much to show for it. Boards are going to start to question cyber costs and program effectiveness. CEOs and CFOs are going to push CIOs and CISOs to justify the ever-increasing OpEx costs associated with security products and tools. I expect to see the purse strings tighten. CIOs and CISOs are going to start to consolidate vendors. And Limor Silve-Kesem of IBM said, quote, the talk about security budgets is all about cuts, while organizations have to push growth in what they offer without additional security investment. What CISO wants to take on and invest their blood, sweat, and tears in a losing game. Organizations without a security chief already flock to get the vCISO consultants and intern CISOs just to get by. So for CISOs, this can be the preferred mode if things continue as they are. So it's interesting. It just looks scary for CISOs and budgets in general, is what Derek and Limor say.
I agree. I think hopefully as CISOs, we've already been doing security budgeting in a way that provides an optimal service for the most value. And value doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest. I mean, it's just the highest value. And so for those who have lined budgeting, doing it this way, any kind of increased scrutinization in the future won't be a large shift to what they've already been doing. So One of the things I say often is, and I say it in the book, is I don't really worry about getting the budget that I need. I think in the end, I'm going to get the budget. There's no question about it. It's how I get the budget. Am I going to get it in a thoughtful process year over year with small incremental investments, or am I going to get it all at once in the wake of a massive breach when customers and clients are asking, what are we doing for security? In the end, I'm going to get the budget. It's just I want to make sure that I'm doing it in the right way. And so doing that, the role of the CISO should be to explain the risks, explain the value proposition, and request budget that way.
David, everything Lee just said sounds really logical, but sounds easier than it actually sounds, doesn't it? And that's why he wrote a book on the subject, too, I should mention.
Yeah, that's why he wrote a book on the subject. I think that CISOs have to understand that they have to be business enablers as well, though. So if you're asking for budget just to build a security program, but that security program is viewed as a hindrance to business development, then you're going to get that scrutiny. They're going to pull budget away. They're going to cut costs because the business is trying to move forward. The business is trying to generate revenue. The business is trying to do the things the business is going to do. So I think as a CISO, you have to be able to turn that around and say, here's how I'm supporting those business objectives. Here's how my program is not only protecting the company, but accelerating or supporting those things that the business wants to accomplish. And I think that's the biggest difference in the way the newer approach is. I mean, the old joke is that it's a CISO, right? The guy who always says no to everything is the CISO. And we can't be that. We've got to be the ones who are saying, yes, I understand the business wants to travel at 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm going to be supportive of that, but I'm going to be there to help protect the business as well. And so I think it's a different conversation in some ways as well.
What are the elements that make a great solution?
Andrew Morgan said, quote, I have been running around my workplace telling everyone and anyone that our security program will be driven by culture, informed by risk, and delivered through people, process, and technology. If you don't win the culture part, it doesn't matter how good your understanding of your risk is or whether you have the best people, processes, and technology, the program has to fail, parentheses, because nobody will care enough to help it succeed. Albert Kolbach of Springbrook Agency said, quote, if employees leave, then that also means knowledge disappears and costs even more than investing in retaining good staff and a healthy corporate culture. I think this is true for everyone, not just CISOs, but this really speaks to how culture isn't just keeping everybody happy. It's like a house of cards. If you don't do this, it all falls apart. David?
I would absolutely agree. I mean, I think that not only goes for the cybersecurity staff and the people who run a security program for an organization, but everybody's a part. I mean, the old adage, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? But you go that from a technology perspective, and we call that shadow IT. There's also this inherent nature that people want to do their job. And if security's in the way, they will find a way around it. So security has to be a path of least resistance as well. So they have to be able to do the safe thing easy so that they want to do it naturally. And if you can't produce that, then you're basically fighting the business. And they're fighting the people and you're fighting the problem. And all of a sudden, you're going to lose because you're outnumbered, probably hundreds to one.
Right. You will always be outnumbered for that matter. But Lee, your book talks about communicating the board, but it seems that culture doesn't happen by itself. It does take an investment, maybe not in tools and technology or maybe some, simplistic things. But how do you sort of invest in improving the culture? And is that something you're communicating to the board? Like, we really need to either pay these people better, create better working environments, because that is going to improve our security environment. Not like I need to buy this new tool, to essentially scan these endpoints.
The thing that came to mind when I heard about this culture aspect of the cybersecurity program, it reminded me of Lou Gerstner. He was the CEO of IBM many years ago, and he said that management doesn't change culture. Management invites the workforce itself to change the culture. And I agree with that. I think that as a CISO, it's our job to create the demand for a security culture. And how I do that is by creating programs that get employees and leaders excited about security. So we do open houses where we open up our doors of our security operations and show the employees what we do. We show them the tools that we use. We show them why it's important, and it gets them excited about it.
Can I pause you? Because that's really interesting you do that. I mean, we talk about sort of cross-pollination, but one example we've seen is like showing like an executive how a hack actually unfolds so they can see for themselves. But when you bring just any staffers in and you're showing the tools and what you're doing, like, give me an idea. Get into the weeds here. What do you do?
Yeah, we usually book a conference room. We work with our vendors to give us free, koozies and stress balls and things like that. We set them out on the table. Sometimes we'll bring food in, and we set up these stations, and they have these very large screens, and we have our cybersecurity team manning each one of those stations. And so one of the stations will be vulnerability management, and we'll show the vulnerability management solution that we have, and we'll answer questions about what is a vulnerability and what is patching and things like that. Then they can move on to our endpoint protection. That would show them that solution. We even have components of our cyber risk partner program, which is like a BISO kind of role in what they do. And then we talk about compliance and, PCI compliance, although the lines for the PCI compliance isn't as long as some of the other lines in the open house.
Nobody gets too excited about compliance.
No. But that's typically what we do. And it's been great.
Can you give me an idea of like some of the things you've heard from employees not in cybersecurity after experiencing something like this?
Well, the big thing is they ask more questions, so they'll reach out to you more.
We hear that is a good indicator of success. David, you're nodding your head as well. Have you done something similar, or maybe just some way you've seen your non-cyber staff get excited about cybersecurity or show interest?
Well, I mean, we do a lot of the same thing. I mean, I don't know if I do it in a conference room with big screens, but we go through some similar open house technology where we expose how we do what we do. We try to get the frontline workers, the non-cyber professionals, to understand how they're a part of that ecosystem to protect the organization, because that's the truth. They can be compromised. They can provide pathways for the attackers. So we try to make sure that we not only show them how that impacts the organization, but how we can help them in their home life. How can we help their families? How can we put it in a perspective of this just not only here at your work, but it's what goes on at home too, and how you can use these techniques and different things that make it a sense for them. And then that's true. They become more involved, and you measure that by how much they begin to feed back to you.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. Is there any other barometers, feedback to you? So it could be like reporting, phishing, or just asking more questions. Is there any other sort of metric you use to sort of see how well that's working than those two?
I use the metrics that when they come to me and say thank you, it's the thank you metric that, hey, I appreciate you going over that. It really helped my mom, my dad, my sister, my brother, my kids, whatever. And so I use that as a methodology too, which is a more positive side of the equation as opposed to just more phishing reports and things like that.
That's a good point, David, because, if you can align your security goals to help the employee, not only at work, but at home, I think that goes a long, long way. It also, one of the things that it did for us was it seeded other programs. Like I have what's called a cybersecurity champions program, where we take employees who are not in cybersecurity and we train them up a little bit more on cybersecurity, and they help spread the word across the enterprise. We expected about 50 volunteers. Maybe we had 50 slots. Over 200 people applied for it. I mean, so that shows you that, there's a lot of interest in this topic.
Now, let me just quickly, in terms of your success for that, was it 200 after you had run those programs you described earlier, or you hadn't and then 200 showed up?
No, it was after.
Yeah, so you kind of seeded it a little bit.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Well, my team did, yeah.
Before I go any further, I do want to tell you about Palo Alto Networks and, more importantly, their brand new announcement, and that is Cortex Cloud. Let me set you up here. To play your best cyber defense, you need enterprise and cloud data within a single unified platform. Now, without AI-powered detections, rapid investigations, and the ability to respond or remediate at speed, security teams are left reacting to threats rather than outmaneuvering them. Cortex Cloud by Palo Alto Networks rewrites the rules of engagement. As the world's only code-to-cloud to SOC platform, it prevents cloud threats in real time with industry-leading runtime protection. This is what it's all about here. So the rise of AI has accelerated cloud adoption, creating complexity that bogs down security teams. Cortex Cloud cuts through the noise by unifying the data, automating workflows, and delivering AI-driven insights that let you see, stop, and shut down attacks before they become headlines. Security shouldn't be a patchwork of disconnected tools, but built as an open platform, Cortex Cloud is designed to integrate data from third-party tools to provide centralized visibility, full context intelligence, and end-to-end remediation across the entire cloud ecosystem. You want to learn more about Cortex Cloud and how Palo Alto Networks is defining the code to cloud to SOC future through real-time security? You got to visit this site, paloaltonetworks.com/cortex/cloud. Remember, paloaltonetworks.com/cortex/cloud, and Cortex is spelled Cortex. Go check them out.
Does anyone have a better solution?
Brett Randall of Fractal said, quote, "It's a stressful time for technology leaders who are aware of the potentially catastrophic business impacts of failing, quote, to do cyber well, but at the same time, either failing to get support or seeing budgets and headcount slash. There's a role for CISOs, CIOs to play in educating the board and executive management of risks and keeping them updated. I only see the relationship between boards and CISO becoming more critical in the years ahead." Lee, I'm sure you very much agree with that quote. To the next one, though, Anna McCraig of Byte Software Services said, quote, "I'd add, make your CISO a board member themselves." I know many would argue for this. Information security is much more than a technology conversation, and the reach into other functions is extensive. It's time the CISO had a seat at the table to deliver effective change with real accountability. Lee, I would just say is, have you seen, with your research for the book, and I'm assuming you talk to other CISOs that do and don't have representation, what changes when a CISO's on the board and not?
When they're presenting to the board?
Or, just they exist on the board. There's argument here for them being, or what we're also hearing is former CISOs with very deep cybersecurity experience being on boards too. So either way here,
Yeah. So the latter would be, it would be very good if we had more cybersecurity experts. Some of the folks against that would say, well, we're mortgaging a board seat to, a specific domain and expertise where that person may not have expertise in finance and operations and other things. And we can't do that for every single business domain that's out there, which I understand, but it doesn't mean that you can't find a security executive, a CISO, who does have that really good understanding of not just a glancing understanding, but a really good experience with finance and economics and budgets and all of those things, and cybersecurity expert. It's not mutually exclusive. And I think there's some comments in the industry about, well, we have somebody who is on the board who is a cybersecurity expert. I would challenge not all of them, but the majority of them. I think there's a distinction between expertise and experience. I think that there are probably some people who have led cybersecurity teams, maybe as a CIO or something like that. That doesn't mean that that person has deep-seated expertise in that area where they've solely devoted their career to one particular domain, which is cybersecurity. And instead, it's just a glancing understanding of it. That's not expertise, in my opinion.
David, let me go to you on this and that. And we've talked about this before, is if you're the only one communicating cybersecurity to the board or to the executive suite, you're this one voice that's communicating. Conversely, you think of other departments like just finance. Well, you have the CFO, but the CEO can talk finance, and probably someone in sales can talk about that as well. So you kind of have three people with a basic understanding. So with just one voice, is it kind of a lone wolf situation where you're just, fighting for your team here? Or is there something that can sort of help and support you in your effort, or really get feedback so you can make better decisions too? What do you think?
You said the same thing, is that when you're talking about like finance or audit, there's more than one voice communicating. So I think that's the objective you're looking for.
But you can't all of a sudden dump and say, all right, you're now also a cybersecurity expert and you care about it every day. To a degree they do, but it's not kind of core to their function.
No, but I think to Lee's point, you have some expertise there, maybe not experience, but you can use that within a board scenario. and drive some, common goal and common conversation.
And so can you give me an example? Like, so where do you see that? Like where you can have a common conversation? Like it's not me as Moses from the Mount talking down to everybody about cybersecurity, but rather we're having sort of an equaler footing conversation.
I can work from my personal experience on the board, and we have some very technical board members who have great industry experience, both in technology and other areas. And we have outside conversations from the board so that I can gain their knowledge, their understanding, and build that relationship as much as anything. But during that board presentation, that comes in handy as well, because they can help guide the conversation to the other board members, even though I don't hold a seat. And the same thing where we talk about, should a CISO have a seat on the board? And I agree, Lee, that you'd be mortgaging a seat. This way, you've got board members who, in a sense, are your advocates and allies who can help guide those conversations to the more non-technical members, but they also are there for your support outside of your 15 minutes of fame. So when those conversations come up later, the other board members turn to them, those technological experts, to say, what do you think? And they give impression, but you've had, as the CISO, input to those. So you can use that. It's a much more political world, and I'm not saying it's not, but I think that you have to utilize that based on who the members are, and you have to gauge that and build those relationships as well. The other side of that equation, where your comment of should a CISO have a board seat, I think we have a model when you think about, you have an audit committee, you have a finance committee, you have all these other committees which aren't composed of 100% board members, but they're spun from the board to then draw in additional expertise. I think the next logical step is a cybersecurity committee for the organization, something that takes those people steps from board memberships with board input, but then puts more expertise around it so that there's a focus and focused presentation and conversation, and then that feeds back to the full board as well. There is definite intermediate step here that can be made.
Yeah, I think one of the things we need to watch out for as we build the next generation of board of directors is we don't want just one expert on a board. We want every board member to have some level of cyber fluency. We don't want it to proxy it all to one expert, because then you lose that interaction between the board members on the best approach to provide oversight to that company. Just real quick, one of the things the listeners should check out is the Digital Directors Network. They do a lot of great things in the area of cybersecurity and board of directors and things like that. I'm a member of that. They do great things.
How do we convince the board?
Jason Popp of Microsoft said, quote, "It continues to astound me that boards/CEOs haven't figured out that they have the power to completely shift their organization's cyber posture, mostly for free. Setting a cyber program structure with a few select risk-informed hygiene initiatives based on a mix of internal and external maturity assessments is well understood. This can be done with minimal financial investment on existing layers if accountability is defined, communicated by the CEO, and measured by each business unit, etc. It's time for everyone to eat more veggies and exercise more." I like that line. Expensive pills aren't the answer to being healthier. I really like the metaphor that Jason put. It alludes to this discussion that we had a couple of segments ago about building corporate culture, that you just kind of need the right leadership and connection and communication, and you could solve a lot. And that could also bubble up to the C-suite and to the board. Like, there's so much that can be done with just culture. Yes, David?
I agree. I mean, culturally, if you've got the support, like I said, if security is a path of least resistance, it becomes natural for people to take the secure approach, and it becomes culturally a part of their day by day. You don't get the pushback and resistance. And the more people working toward that same objective leads to better results and, better hygiene, better reporting. Cybersecurity can then look at more and be a part of the organization. So, I mean, yeah, culture plays an absolute part of that. Getting involvement from everybody plays a part of that, and that's going to feed up to the board. I love the fact that you have these companies that I read all the time, and people say, we have a security first approach. And yet the industry comes back all the time and says, well, we forgot about security. It was an afterthought. It was too expensive. Well, how do you have security first and it be an afterthought?
Well, no one's going to say with security second.
Right. So if you really put security first, that's the point, then it becomes cultural. It becomes everybody. Everybody gets involved. And I think that's what the security leaders and the CISOs have to do, is build that culture of involvement, educate, show how it involves not just in the business world, but their personal world. And then you've got a team of the entire company working toward that directive instead of just a few people fighting to roll that rock uphill. It's everybody pushing together. So yeah, I think that's the first step. And that is going to filter up to the board. It's going to make a difference. And the CEOs are going to say, hey, we see that, and make those changes because that's the direction they need to go to be supportive, profitable. That's where they need to be.
I remember interviewing a woman many years ago who literally her job was essentially building and maintaining culture at the company. And, she said, it doesn't happen on its own. You have to actually work at it. Both of you gave great examples of how you work at it for security. I got to assume, like anything else, things fall apart because people get busy with other things, and just security is yet another thing that can get pushed away. Lee, let's close with you on this. How do you not fall into that rut?
Well, first, before I get into that, I would say that, the foundational elements of security are incredibly important. And those are the ones that tend not to be too expensive. When you talk about patching and things like that, you can do wonders in that area. I look at our adversaries. I think I mentioned it before on another Defense in Depth, is our adversaries don't start with custom malware. They start with the open doors and the open windows, the foundational stuff. So that's what CISO should do. They should start with the foundational stuff and then move into the super sexy security stuff. I think that relationship building is the primary factor in advancing a cybersecurity program. And I think that if CISOs are having customized conversations with whoever they're talking to, the CFO, the chief marketing officer, whoever, they're customizing that conversation and they're tracking their relationships and they're understanding, okay, I haven't talked to this person in 2 quarters. I need to reach out to them again. Or, customization of the message. You can't do a blanket security message to all members of the executive team, the board, the directors, the middle management. It just doesn't work. You have to tailor it to the person who's listening to it. I think that's the key, is building the relationships in a very close working professional relationship.
I want to add one thing to that, and I agree with what you're saying, is the question that they always need to ask in those personal conversations is, how can I help? That has got to be the words of the CISO. So if you're sitting in front of the CFO, the CMO, somebody else in those organizations, how can I help? Not how do you help my security program? How does my security program help you? How can I help?
Yeah, the best question, it was brought up by Dan in his LinkedIn post, and that is, my favorite question comes from the board, is when they say, Lee, are you aware of any material weaknesses in the cybersecurity program? And do you have all the resources you need to address those? And on one side of me is my boss, and the other side is my boss's boss. That's a really unique time to answer that question. That's a great way to draw out what a CISO needs.
That is great. If you could always be fed that question right when those people are in the room, you'd be very, very happy,
Yeah.
CISO.
It goes into minutes too. So,
Oh, awesome. All right. Well, we've come to the portion of our show. You actually mentioned somebody, but I don't know if it's your favorite quote. David Tabertsky, I'm going to ask you, take a look at the quotes. Tell me which quote was your favorite, and just tell me why'd you like it so much.
Well, I think the Brett Randall quote, which is it's a stressful time for CISOs and for the industry. I agree with that, but I think it goes to what we're saying, is that it's stressful because you haven't built the culture. You don't have the good relationships. You're struggling to try to build an environment that isn't supportive of the business. And so to the point, you're pushing a rock uphill and you have to decide, be supportive, build those relationships. And that stress level reduces because you realize you have allies in your quest to protect an organization, quest to protect the business. And so building that structure out and being there helps reduce that stress and builds a longevity into the organization, which will lead to, instead of 24 months, maybe 36 or 48 months, because now you're being part of the business. We talk about it goes to, you want a seat at the table? Well, you have to earn your seat at the table. And to earn your seat, you've got to be a part of the business and be a part of the solutions and be a part of developing the forward momentum. And so it goes to all of that. And I think that stress is caused because you're not in that spot.
That's a very good point. Lee, your favorite quote and why?
Yeah, so Brett Randall gets a twofer. That was my favorite as well. So there's a role for CISOs to play in educating the board and executive management of the risks and keeping them updated. I only see this relationship between boards and the CIO becoming more critical in the years ahead. I can't stress enough how important the relationship building is, and I think Brett nailed it.
And that is kind of the theme that I've been hearing from both of you throughout this episode is relationship building, not at the actual meeting point of presentation, but beforehand.
Some very self-promotion.
Yes,
I have
please.
another book coming out in the spring, and it's called Security Relationship Management, Leveraging Marketing Concepts to Advance Cybersecurity Program. So that will be out in April.
We will get you back on again.
I feel bad. I now feel like I need to write a book. So
You do, David. You can still connect with David Tyberski on LinkedIn. He's always entertaining, if you didn't already know that from this episode alone. By the way, we will link to Lee's current book on the blog post for this very episode, and that book being The Shortest Hour, referring to that just 1 hour at a time you get with the board the entire year, applied approach to boardroom governance, cybersecurity. Thank you both very much. Thank you so much for stepping in, Lee, and thank you so much, David, as well. And I want a huge thanks to our sponsor, Palo Alto Networks, and their brand new Cortex Cloud, defining the code to cloud to SOC future through real-time security. It's pretty awesome. Go check them out at paloaltonetworks.com/cortex/cloud. paloaltonetworks.com/cortex/cloud. As always, to our audience, we greatly appreciate your contributions. Please, if you see a really good conversation on LinkedIn that you think could be an entire episode of Defense in Depth, send it to me. We find that is our greatest resource to turn into full episodes. So thank you again for your contributions and listening to Defense in Depth.
We've reached the end of Defense in Depth. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss yet another hot topic in cybersecurity. This show thrives on your contributions. Please write a review, leave a comment on LinkedIn or on our site, CISOseries.com, where you'll also see plenty of ways to participate, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to Defense in Depth.